Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. I'm Joe Samaniego. With me, we have Ben Schneider from Grid Encore and NASCAR.info. Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight. We're almost getting up there to the after dark hour, so we're going to keep this simple. And a big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network each and every month. Robin's name's in gold because she upped her membership, doubling it. A big thank you to her. You too can invest in the Grid Network. Links in the video description to our Patreon page. You could also do a one-time investment through Buy Me a Coffee or YouTube Super Chat. Astro Police, $20, got his name on the board. So a big thank you to Astro Police. And of course, simplest way to support us, hit the bell icon, subscribe, follow us, Grid Network TV, across social media and our website. Articles will be coming up later in the week for NASCAR, INDYCAR. Ben, let's start with NASCAR. The Grant Park 165 this year. They reduced it, and again, we had rain. Considering the race weekend started off good, the weather looked like there was going to be no issue. Then the rain today, and stage 2, this is where I think the trouble occurred. We had the stage end under caution. I believe it was Corey LaJoie that made the spin, so they had to throw out the caution. Nobody made pit stops. NASCAR said we didn't want that. But when everyone did, we had a double file restart, wet conditions, poor visibility, and then we saw 2 crashes. Bubba Wallace, Daniel Suarez, Alex Palou got into them. They all collided. But the big one, entering turn 6, Chase Briscoe, who was having a pretty good day, lost control and while sliding, hit Shane Van Gisbergen back bumper just perfectly to where it just pushed Shane Gisbergen to the wall, and he missed the tire barrier. He hit the concrete while Chase Briscoe hit the tire barrier, kept going. But Shane Van Gisbergen, the defending champion of this race, he was out of the race. First one, and Ben, I felt NASCAR needs to remember how they handled this race last year because we had single file restarts under these wet conditions. Denny Hamlin famously tweeted, "Don't do it, NASCAR," saying don't go under such poor conditions. Everyone was on wet. The teams, they all eventually were looking at switching to wets. Once this stage started, they did that. And this year, at least I was thinking I was going to applaud NASCAR to begin because they allowed the drivers and teams to decide, you want to start on wet, you want to start on dry. But that double file restart, that handling the second stage, beginning and of the first stage, I just thought was a huge mess. And then the caution flag, we even saw cars stacking up exiting pit road because there was a jet dryers there. I felt that could have been a little better communication from NASCAR on preventing that from occurring because we saw Bubba Wallace also get some hits there. So did NASCAR, their decision making, the double file restart, going back racing with deteriorating conditions, did NASCAR make the mistake, and does that really cost Shane Van Gisbergen a chance to win today?
Yes, and look, I don't want to blame Chase Briscoe too much. He was clearly out of control by the time that he cleaned out SVG, so I'm sure that was not intentional. And to SVG's credit, he even said as much in his post-race interview. But yeah, I mean, I saw the usual, why are we doing this? Why are we here? Chicagoland's right down the road. Why don't we go there? Like people so staunchly opposed to NASCAR on a street course. That's not me. I am all for a street race, but I mean, my goodness, you have to be able to manage it right. Why did we wait until 5 Eastern to start this race? Absolutely beyond me. If NBC wanted their doubleheader that badly, run the Chicago race at 1 p.m., noon local time, 1 p.m. on the East Coast, and then roll right into Mid-Ohio afterwards. Or just say to, NBC, if you're NASCAR or IndyCar, you guys have too much power as the TV networks. This is when we're going to air the race or hold the race. If you want to broadcast the race, you can find a network in your family of networks or streaming platforms to be able to do so. It drives me insane that, we work our start times around so many different factors that keep this race from starting until 5 p.m. when we could have gotten the race in this afternoon before the weather hit. Or if the weather hit this afternoon, we would have left ourselves a longer window to get more of the race in. So that's frustration number one. Frustration number two, why did we restart the race double file in such deteriorating conditions like you were mentioning, Joe? I mean, forget SVG. It could have been anybody whose race was ruined by unsafe conditions like that. And unfortunately for, I think, a lot of NASCAR fans, particularly fans that got into this race last year that maybe felt a connection to SVG because it was the first race that they attended or the first race they've watched because it was, something new, something unusual for NASCAR. And certainly a lot of fans down under, a lot of our viewers from down under, I'm sure we're pulling for SVG today to go back to back. And, if think about it this way, if you're invested in this race just for SVG, what was the point in even continuing to watch the race after he fell out? I'm not saying that, I think race fans at heart will certainly stick around for the end of the race, but I think there are a lot of casual fans or a lot of SVG fans that this race was certainly marketed towards that might have tuned out after he fell out of the race, and he didn't have to fall out of the race that soon because NASCAR made a poor decision in how race control was going to handle this. So I think it's just it's incredibly frustrating to me that we're here for the second year in a row. And, we did get a good race and a good result both times, I think. Ultimately, we didn't end up going all the distance that we initially intended. But part of the weekend was still salvaged in that sense. But I feel like it could have been even better than it was. And again, I feel bad for the fans that came out to Chicago. Obviously, you can't control the weather, but there are things you can do to mitigate that risk and give you an exponentially larger window to try to get the race in, try to give the fans as much of their money's worth as you possibly can. And I feel like NASCAR didn't take advantage of that opportunity today. So we'll see. Hopefully this isn't the end for street racing or the end for Chicago. I hope that they can get a good, clean race weekend without weather under their belts here. Fortunately, we got that with the Xfinity race yesterday. And of course, we'll have more on that on Encore tomorrow. But yeah, just incredibly frustrating as a viewer to be sitting around, and again, we can talk about the stage breaks and the stage cautions and how it completely ruins, in my opinion, it ruins NASCAR racing as a whole. I know a lot of fans disagree with that, but it especially ruins strategy on road and street courses. Clearly, with what we saw today, with the weather, I think, if stages didn't exist, we would have tried to go green again before the end of stage one. And then stage two, why we need a caution for the sake of having a caution, because it's the end of a stage when we already have a timed race. Absolutely beyond me. I don't know why we decided that wasn't working last year, but they felt strongly enough about it that they reverted back before the season was even over so that they could put their precious stage breaks back in their playoff race, I guess. I don't know. It's just, it's very frustrating to me as a viewer, and I'm sure a lot of fans felt the same way today.
I have to say, it was a bit frustrating. Before I get into my point, I see in the chat room, Joshua Burst, quick thing before I go to bed, NASCAR needs to get rain races timing fixed. Also, information on how the races end better explained. Enjoy the show. He brings up a good point because I was a little confused. They said, what? The clock hit 0.00. White flag, we're over. We didn't get the white flag. He still had Bowman do another lap. So I do see that miscommunication that could be improved.
And that's another thing. I'm glad Josh brought that up. And I know Matthew Owens and I were texting back and forth as the race was going on. Why the NBC broadcast continued to have the laps on the top left of the screen and only put this countdown clock up, here and there, is also a decision that I don't understand. It's clearly a timed race. There was no chance that we were going to, complete all 75 laps. Why you couldn't put the timer or the clock in the top left in place of the laps, I don't know. I'm not in the production truck. Maybe it's a more complicated sort of deal to try to change those graphics over than I realized, but I wouldn't think it would be that hard to just change some graphics around. And at the very least, could you at least keep the clock on the screen the entire time? I know I told Matthew, they don't even do this for the weakest link, which is, just even more ridiculous to me. If there's your game show reference for the episode here, but it didn't shock me. I mean, I was disappointed, but I wasn't necessarily surprised. But that's, again, another sort of issue where I feel like if that had been a Fox broadcast, the timeline would have been all over that. What are we doing not showing the clock? But for some reason, I guess everybody's Fox fatigued. I didn't see very many people complaining about that today, but that's something I'd like to see improvement from on NBC's end in the future. If we get a timed race, make sure we know how much time is left. We don't need, lap X out of 75 because we know we're not getting to lap 75. So that's something that could be improved as well.
Yeah, that could be improved as well, too. Also in the chat room, SVG got robbed. He was on way to win the race before he got punted by Briscoe.
Don't disagree.
I mean, it's just one of those deals where the favorite of the race, the favorite of the weekend, the headline story, and then it's out so early. And I agree with it. it could have been any driver that lost control, but just the fact that we had double file restarts, the aggression, when they were all coming out that final corner to take the green flag, you could see them sideways already. And I was like, boy, this is getting crazy. I felt, why did we do this, NASCAR? We've learned the lessons from COTA 2 years ago, where there were some wet conditions with poor visibility. They then switched to, okay, single file. Then last year, everybody was applauded for how they handled the race with the single file restart. I believe the restart zone was the corner before. This year, I noticed it was on the straightaway, kept everyone more bunched up. I just felt like, okay, I know we're trying to make a good show, but I felt that they just really cost it to where you allow so many drivers' races to be ruined. Bowman ruined the days of Wallace Suarez, but they kept going for Shane Van Gisbergen, the driver, as you said. Potentially a lot of fans turned out just because of this race. He was done for. So unfortunately, that was a tough break for Shane Van Gisbergen. Colic racing, just having an absolute dreadful year. One of those races that just nothing seems to be going well. But once we got the race going, we had about an hour left in race time. Ty Gibbs was the later when the race resumed. During stage one, NASCAR did at least announce that by 9:20 Eastern time, so that was 8:20 Central time in Chicago, that's when the race will end. And this race was reduced. Last year was 220 miles. This year, 165. The rain delay, because of the heavy rain, what happened in stage two, it just took it out a lot of time for racing, unfortunately. But once we did get racing, before we even hit the halfway mark, Kyle Larson, the other favorite bin, locks up, crashes out. So he was done. Those two just yesterday, I know you'll be talking a lot about it tomorrow, had an epic race Saturday, and both of them were done for. He just barely hit that tire wall. He got a lot of the concrete. That was, if they do come back next year, I'm hoping they're looking some way to improving it, because I know you can only stack the tires up to a wall at a certain point, but a car hitting at an angle where it still hits the concrete, that is just scary. After that caution, the next caution was for that stage break. And something interesting, Joey Hand leading the race, led stage two. The RFK social media crew did have a stage winner graphic, so good for Joey Hand. And he was leading with 15 minutes left. I was wondering, could we see another non-full-time driver win this race? But then Bowman got around him. Josh Berry gets into the wall. He's been on the wall like 3 times today, but this time he was done for. Another caution. So then Bowman, he started pulling away from Joey Hand. Reddick was coming quickly, much fresher tires. But then Reddick hit the turn fall wall on the inside, very similar to what Austin Dillon did. But instead of the last corner, turn 4, Tyler Reddick at least was able to keep it going. Not significant damage, but that just allowed Bowman the opportunity to get his first NASCAR Cup Series win since his injury. First on a road course, and the first full-time driver to win in the Chicago street course. And now he's in the playoffs with his other Hendrick Motorsports teammates. This has to be a big relief. But how great was this call by his crew chief for Bowman to stay out, as we saw Bell, who pitted, fell back, trouble. It seemed like this was absolutely the smart move to do.
Yeah, well, clearly it was. He won the race. I think everybody else is wishing that they had, tried something similar if they didn't, or if they got shuffled further back. But yeah, fantastic call on Bowman's part. Fantastic call for Joey Hand as well. I know he didn't get the victory, but fourth place still, as talented of a driver as Joey Hand is, much higher than I was expecting him on the results sheet, just because, again, despite what SVG made it look like last year, it's not easy to come over into another discipline just a couple of times a year. I think in Joey Hand's case, this was his first start in almost 2 years at the Cup Series level, and certainly first in this caliber of equipment. I know that they say the Rick Ware car he was driving maybe had some Stewart Haas influence back in the day, but this is a full-on RFK effort, and he certainly made the most of it and had a fantastic run today. So credit where it's due to him. But you have to give credit to Alex Bowman as well. This is something that he desperately needed. Like you mentioned, Joe, he's in the playoffs now with his teammates. And, I think when you look at Bowman and you look at his career and the winless streak that he's been on, I know he dealt with the injury last year, and that kind of set him and Chase Elliott, to be fair, back in 2023. But I would really say there are no weak links at Hendrick. But if you had to make a choice, William Byron, I think, really coming into his own, winning a bunch of races, emerging as a potential championship contender here as early as this season, or maybe he has been for the last couple of seasons in the eyes of a lot of people. Chase Elliott, obviously a NASCAR champion. Kyle Larson, obviously a NASCAR champion. Bowman, by no means is this an insult to him, because he is a talented driver in his own right, but I think he for whatever reason has not been able to rack up the wins and championship level accolades of his 300 teammates to this point in his career. So to get a win like this, to hold off a veteran road and street course driver with the talent of Joey Hand and a couple of the other drivers up there as well that were making things interesting, a hard charging Tyler Reddick as well. I know he made a mistake on the last lap. I would have liked to see if he hadn't done that, if he could have gotten around him there at the very end. But it was not an easy victory by Alex Bowman today. We'll just leave it there. And well done to him. He certainly deserved this one.
Yeah, he certainly deserved this race win. One of the big things, as you said, it was the winning strategy. And I think, especially after what we saw, I know it was earlier in the day, Formula One, where a wet tire, once it's worn out, seems to have that little bit of a sweet spot where it can still be pretty fast on dry conditions. Christopher Bell, I think he was hoping more drivers would have made the pit, because ninth place, I just thought even if he didn't get in that crash, he would not have enough time to get up towards the front. Big shout out to Alex Bowman's crew chief, that team, for saying, let's stay out, because that was the winning move. And I think a lot of folks, especially if we get more road course races with changing conditions and a late caution like this, I see no point in making a pit stop. Just stay out there, especially in a situation like Bowman, winless, trying to get into playoffs. In the chat room, Josh brings up a point about when the time runs out and leader crosses the line, 2 to go, then 1 white flag, no overtime if yellow race ends. We know today that was the circumstances that the race could end under yellow. But I have to ask, when it comes to these races, and especially road course races, where on a street course you have to be out the next day, we have that time limit. Could there be something where NASCAR has sort of okay, this is our rule package, not for the cars, but as a series, how we're going to rule it, where if for some reason we don't get the half distance, it's half points or full points, but at least everybody knows. If we get close, there's no overtime. Do you think NASCAR needs to start creating something like that? Because unfortunately, Chicago, 2 for 2, we've had races go much longer than anticipated.
Honestly, Joe, I think the easiest solution is noon. That's what it comes down to. And I'll even give you noon local time, not noon Eastern time. I'll give you noon local time in this case. Can we at least get 1 p.m.? Can we at least get that? Because again, I know that I talked about this at the start of a show, but that would be the simplest thing. We can draft up all these overtime procedures, or what happens if this is the case, if we're running up against darkness, if we're not quite to halfway like we got in the Xfinity race last year in NASCAR. I mean, they clearly can call audibles. They did last year. Why don't we call an audible to not throw a caution for the end of stage 2 so we can give the fans as much racing as possible? I don't know. I don't know I don't think that there's an easy solution. So in my mind, the easiest solution is actually to better plan for all of these outcomes by giving you more time to get the race in. But I'll stop dying on that hill. Well, I won't stop dying on the hill. I'll stop beating a dead horse, so to speak, here. And we can get on with the show here. But I feel like that's got to be the answer. Just start the race a little bit earlier. The humidity, and I'm not a weatherman or meteorologist, but it seems, you're 2 for 2, like you mentioned. The storms have a very high risk that they're going to pop up in the evening hours and delay the race and ultimately cut the race short. And that's what's happened 2 years in a row here. So anything you can do, of course, NASCAR. I just saw Matthew Owens, my friend, tweet this actually. Can we stop with the NASCAR can't control the weather? Of course we know they can't control the weather. We can control the start times. We can do everything in our power to try to give us as much of a window as possible. And this is the 3rd Sunday in a row that we've been on the air, goodness knows how late here on this wrap-up show, because the NASCAR race just will not end. It's just absolutely exhausting. And for once, I'm actually glad NBC's taking an Olympic break, because I think everybody needs a couple of weeks off at this point.
we're just a few races into the NBC portion. This is something where I feel I understand the shift where, okay, NBC, Fox, the networks, they say, oh, this is the best time you're going to get the most audience. That's why we're not seeing the same number of Saturday night races because supposedly those don't do well. But I feel at what point can NASCAR say to the networks, hey, weather is going to be an issue and this is not a road course. This is city streets. If it rains, it's going to flood up quickly. We don't have to run off like a Coda, but well, we saw what happened with Coda even when you get just enough rain. I just feel this is just something where have that earlier start time. Even the network are saying, well, you could get more if you start at 2, 3 p.m. I don't know, because things like this is motorsports. And especially on a street course, you cannot come back the next day. You just can't, because those streets have to be open for everyone, get into work, visiting Chicago. It's just one of those deals. And I think NASCAR, NBC, hopefully next year. I like that we had INDYCAR and NASCAR, but if it has to be a change in schedule and we don't have a weather situation, I think people will be just as happy with how it turned out. While Bowman was happy with everything turning out the way he did for him, one driver that's not happy, and unfortunately, getting a lot of unfortunate messaging on social media, Bubba Wallace. Bubba, as I mentioned, he had contact by Bowman earlier, but that was under that very treacherous conditions when they restarted stage 2 into heavy rains. But during the cool down lap, Bubba came up to Bowman's car, pushed him into a wall, and this reminded me of Charlotte. I don't remember the year, but when Brad Keselowski slammed to Matt Kenseth while trying to get to Denny Hamlin. Of course, Kenseth said he had already undone his belts. That was a safety issue. Of course, Kenseth then jumped Brad Keselowski in a fight between the haulers. That was very uncalled for. This was very uncalled for. Does NASCAR need to sit down with Bubba about post-race activities like this?
Yes, and I want to make something very clear before I get too deep into this. I've been very consistent on this. If you want to have a discussion based on something that happened on track, do what Chase Elliott and Daniel Suarez did. And I mean, they clearly were not happy with each other. Clearly there was some sort of disagreement there. Front Stretch posted that video of them talking, but everything remained calm. They waited until they got out of their cars to have that discussion and hash out their disagreements. I don't care who's driving the race car, Bubba Wallace, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, whoever it is. You don't do that with your car. And I'm so frustrated that Bubba Wallace did that because, like you mentioned, Joe, I mean, this is somebody that gets an incredibly unfair and pathetic amount of hate comments from, that portion of the fan base that's not even worth bringing up. But I think that as awful as that is and unfortunate as that is, I think it's on Bubba Wallace in many respects to do as much as he can to not fuel those flames or fan those flames, rather fuel that fire, and not give those fans something to get mad at him over. So, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying, it's a very difficult situation, of course, but I don't know. My mind goes a million miles a minute when something like this happens because it's just so incredibly frustrating. And I know we were talking before we came on here backstage. I said, I can't believe he did that. And then, you think to myself, well, you think of, ironically enough, with Alex Bowman, throwing the Powerade in his face, all those years ago at Charlotte, long before any of the stuff that happened in 2020 went down, so this isn't even a new issue for Bubba Wallace. It's just incredibly frustrating. And I do think NASCAR should sit down with him and try to, have that conversation with him and let him know that, this isn't something that we want to see. And this isn't something that our fans want to see because it's going to lead to stuff like this. As unfortunate and as uncalled for as that is, Bubba Wallace could do more on his side of things to not give them that leverage, to not give them that opportunity to say those things. And again, it's not a defense of those at all. It's just, it's incredibly frustrating to have to sit here and react to Bubba Wallace being in the headlines again, because those people are going to pick it up. And I'm well aware, but he's far from the only race car driver that lets the emotions get the best of him sometimes. But I do think he does have a responsibility to be a little bit more careful and cautious, as all drivers do, but Bubba especially because of the situation that he's in, to not give those fans that opportunity to go after him.
And especially considering, the race was over. Bowman could have undone some belts as well, too. There's a potential for injury. Keselowski, he got in trouble for this. Tony Stewart in the past as well. Definitely Bubba needs to be sat down, talked to, because it's just one of those deals where it shouldn't be happening. Like you said, Suarez, Chase Elliott, they chatted. And actually, Suarez, 11th place, Bubba Wallace, 13th place. It didn't exactly ruin their days. Still top 15. I know they probably were thinking higher, but as crazy as today went, they should be just as happy that they're in the top half of the field.
Yeah, and Joe, I think I saw somewhere that like he made up points on the cut line. I mean, I'm sure he would love a win so that he doesn't even have to worry about that. But it's not like he finished in last place because the contact was terminal at the start of the race. So to wait until the very end of the race on a cool down lap when after Bowman's window net was down to drive him into the wall. I don't know. You can't be playing those kinds of games with 3,400 pound stock cars. I don't care who the driver is, and Bubba especially. I'm. It's very frustrating to see that after the race.
And I can only imagine probably Denny might talk about it in his podcast tomorrow too, because he knows he's going to probably be seeing some of the stuff and potentially that as well. In the chat room, Les agreed that Shane Van Gisbergen was on track to sweep the weekend. Just gutted for him, and then agreeing with Les, still a fantastic race, but if Shane was still in it, and I think like you said, Ben, just having one of the favorites, well, two of the favorites, Shane Van Gisbergen, Kyle Larson, both out so early. It's NASCAR just opened up for a lot of drivers to potentially get their first win. Some drivers like Tyler Reddick trying to get another win. At the end of the day, Bowman, first win of the year, first time on the road course and on the street course. So he's one out of now 12 drivers in the playoffs. And we have 6 races remaining. So some of the notable drivers without a win that have won in past years: Kyle Busch, Ross Chastain, Michael McDowell, Chris Buescher, Chase Briscoe, Bubba Wallace, Martin Truex Jr. That's more than 6 names, Ben. One of these past winners or more could be out of the playoffs because you got drivers without a win. Ty Gibbs, he's looking good. We've seen Josh Berry. Today was not a good day, but he's had some good days. And then a surprise winner potentially at Daytona that we're not talking about. Darlington, I would not count out Eric Jones yet. That team's not exactly there, but he loves that track. Out of the past winners, which driver is less likely to make the playoffs?
I don't know, man. I mean, it's tough. You've got some heavy hitters on my list. I would like to think Kyle Busch is safe, but the way this year has gone, who knows? Ross Chastain, again, almost won a championship in 2022, would have won a championship last year if he had just been in the championship 4. I would think Martin Truex Jr. is probably safe on points, but, as chaotic as this race was today, you just never know what's going to happen. I would have to say, just looking at this list, I would think probably, credit to him, he had a strong run today. Michael McDowell up in the top 5, but as much as that front row team has improved, I think, they would certainly need to win a race to be comfortable. Bubba Wallace, again, he's kind of been a fringe playoff contender the last few years. For 2 years, he didn't make the playoffs. He won playoff races, but he needed those wins earlier in the season to get him in. Last year, he didn't win a race, but he was able to point his way in. So, he's going to be on the bubble as well. Chase Briscoe, again, I'm sure would love to send Stewart Haas Racing off with, a fighting shot at a championship, but, it really could be any of them. Chris Buescher, again, how frustrating is Darlington for him now, not being able to have that sticker on his car like he was saying to Tyler Reddick. And I'm sure he's glad that, it was his boss and teammate Brad Keselowski that got that sticker instead. But, he could be in trouble here as well. So we'll just have to wait and see. But none of those names I think are 100% safe except for maybe Martin Truex Jr. But even then, who had Bowman winning this race today? You just never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, Truex right now, point-wise is looking good, but a couple surprise winners here and there, a poor race here and there. It could totally change the playoffs. As in the chat room, all the Hendrick Motorsports in the playoffs right now. Bowman making it where all 4 of them are. Joe Gibbs will love to make it where all of his drivers are in the playoffs. And of course, NASCAR will be back next weekend. They're going to Pocono, one of the more traditional racetracks. So I think a lot of drivers, especially after a rough day at the Chicago Street Course, they'll be excited about this. Ben, let's go ahead and bring in Kobe Lameth because it is time for us to essentially recap the INDYCAR race, which was in between the 2 big races, F1 and the street course.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome back, Kobe. So the race's first half looked like it was going to be another Alex Palou clinic with him running away to the win, but then on lap 53, Pato O'Ward was less than a second behind Palou. O'Ward pitted 2 laps later on lap 55. Palou stayed out 1 lap to pit 1 lap later than O'Ward did, and Palou was able to catch up there at the end, but got loose with 13 laps to go, exiting the final corner, and potentially, you could say, used up the tires in the dirty air, caught up to some lap traffic as well. And O'Ward was able to get through that a little bit better than Palou was, and that ultimately led to O'Ward crossing the finish line first on track for the first time in a while. Of course, he inherited that win at the start of the year, but he is now officially a 2-time winner in 2024. This is the first time, however, that he actually got to celebrate his win on the day that it happened. So, Kobe, we'll start with you. Was today the demonstration of a full potential between Pato O'Ward and McLaren?
Definitely, Ben. I feel like today was a long time coming for Pato O'Ward and this number 5 era McLaren team. We've seen him close, to win on multiple occasions. It's certainly been a while since O'Ward has won on track. When he actually crossed the start finish line first, instead of having that win handed to him at St. Pete after Joseph Newgarden was disqualified, for the push to pass violation there. So after that, and then coming 2 corners short of winning the Indianapolis 500 in the month of May to finally get that checker flag, get the monkey off his back. I think it's a huge sigh of relief for Pato O'Ward, and with the pressure off for him to win, I think we could potentially see him in contention to win a lot more races down the stretch here. And I truly believe that this is what they are capable of, to take the fight to Alex Palou. Like you said, looked like Alex Palou was just going to walk away with this. Honestly, thought Palou had this in the bag, very early on, and thought he was just going to run away with this entire race if we didn't see another caution. But to my surprise, Pato O'Ward, he kept fighting, he kept digging. The team made the car better during the pit stops, and he was able to drive up there and get around. And so kudos to Pato there for a really great drive, and that finish was very intense there with the lap cars at the very end. Definitely made it very, very interesting, but everybody was respectful. Nobody tried doing team order. I know the NBC announcers were talking about Kiffin Simpson, a Chip Ganassi racing teammate, Alex Palou. They thought he might potentially try to slow up O'Ward so Palou would have a chance to get there, but the dirty air was just a big problem all day long, and O'Ward was just never able to get by those cars. And overall, it was just a really good day for Pato O'Ward's team.
Pato O'Ward's team, I think a lot of folks have been waiting for this out of that team. Year after year, people talk about him. Oh, this could be his year where he contends for the championship. He contends for more wins. Last year did not go good at all. This year, he had that win at St. Petersburg, but of course, as you mentioned, Kobe, Ben, it was because the person that crossed the finish line first was disqualified. So now they come out, they just missed the pole by 0.024. I think this got the team riled up that, look, we could bring the fight to Chip Ganassi race, to Alex Palou. This is not going to be Alex Palou's race to run away. That first half of the race, I was starting to think, okay, is this how it's going to go? Are they sort of waiting for a caution of how everything's going to turn out? Boy, if Pato O'Ward come out in that right part of the race where he had to bring the heat, he did that. He made that pit stop work, the undercut. What a job. If they could do this the next race weekend, the weekend after, that will be huge for this team to start being championship contenders, running up there with Penske and Chip Ganassi on a more regular basis. And that's why I think really this McLaren team should be at. Let's not even get into the pressure on the drivers, but this team should be up there week in and week out. Pato O'Ward, he still has some tracks where he's really going to have to step up his performance. I'm looking at Portland. He just never seems to do that great here. But if he could bring what he did today, we got a good fight on our hands, and I think this could really ignite some more excitement about IndyCar and the championship.
Well, let's talk about that potential battle a little bit more. Palou led the most laps and earned the bonus point for most laps led. The race was caution-free, although we did have the initial start delayed by Palou's teammate Scott Dixon, who had mechanical issues before the start of the race. He did ultimately get back out on track. No chance to contend for a good finish, though, obviously, just logging laps and finishing last, I believe, 39 laps down. But Palou seemed to have the second-best car behind O'Ward and McLaren, and it was the closest front row, one of the closest front rows, at least, maybe the closest in series history, 0.0024, 24 ten-thousandths of a second, separating them in qualifying. So, Kobe, what do you think of the potential between an O'Ward versus Palou rivalry in this sport? How big would that be for the IndyCar series?
I think it would be phenomenal if we were able to get a rivalry started between Alex Palou and Pato O'Ward. I feel like, Alex Palou is set it up to be this generation's Scott Dixon, and Pato O'Ward, he just has his raw speed and he's extremely faster. And like the NBC announcer like to say, he has those ninja hands so quick. Whenever you think the car is going to snap around on him, he ends up saving it. I've seen Pato O'Ward save this car so many times that I've completely lost count. And just the Indy 500 alone, if you look at his onboard footage from that race, he really should have crashed like 5, 6, 7 times, but he ended up saving it. He's just a phenomenal talent. Both of these drivers are generational talents, and I think it would be great if we could see these two competing for wins on a more regular basis. I think this has potential to develop into more, but we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But there's no doubt these are definitely two number one drivers in the sport.
These are two great drivers, and I want to see those two fighting for the championship. When Alex Palou won his first championship at Long Beach, I was hopeful we would see a great fight between Pato O'Ward, Alex Palou. Unfortunately, first lap Pato O'Ward got spun out. That ruined his race. And it just seems like Pato O'Ward has just not exactly been at that top caliber. What we saw at Mid-Ohio, Pato O'Ward could do that. We're going to have a championship battle on our hand. I think a lot of folks will love to see what these two teams could do, battling each other week after week, how much more faster they could push the car themselves, the pit crew. And let's not forget, while these two will be great to have that little bit of rivalry, you still cannot count out some of the drivers, especially Tim Penske. Scott McLaughlin, third place today. I mean, he is a driver to watch. I think there's a lot of potential. These two could easily be the poster rivalry, but you have a competitive field of Andretti, Penske drivers that could go out there and get the win.
All right, I understand we might have a comment in the chat room as well. Shaq Johnson, wife was planning steaks tonight if Logano won. Now it's hot dogs. Shaking my head. Okay, maybe that's a reference that I'm not picking up on there. Is that reference to Bowman the last winning at Martinsville a while ago? I'm not sure I necessarily understand that one, but we'll leave it there. Interesting dinner selection, I guess, for you two tonight. So we move on now. All three Andretti cars finished in the top 10. Taking a look at the rest of the rundown a little bit. Rossi 6th ahead of Lundgaard and 7th. Siegel was 20th. McLaughlin, the only Penske driver in the top 10. Power was 11th. And Newgarden 25th. Santino Ferrucci went from 21st to 10th, so he was one of the big movers, as was Toby Sowery from 24th to 13th. Plenty of action all across the track. Great result for Sowery as well. I think equaling one of the best results from Dale Coyne's outfit this entire season so far. So, Kobe, overall, was this a successful start to the hybrid era? Or were you hopeful to see a bit more of a difference with drivers having more access to that additional power?
Well, like Scott McLaughlin was saying in his post-race interview, he said, he was basically just playing with the hybrid system, figuring out how it works. And I think that, honestly, that this is just going to take a little bit of time for the drivers to figure out. And I also want to say kudos to IndyCar for being able to debut this in the middle of the season. I know it was supposed to happen at the very beginning of the season, but after there were so many tests and gremlins and things going wrong over the offseason, before 2024 got underway, IndyCar thought it was the best idea to wait until middle of the season to allow several more months of development to make sure this engine was able to debut without many issues. I know we saw some issues, leading up to the race at Mid Ohio, and then we saw, the issue with Scott Dixon at the right before the race started. But I think overall IndyCar has to be happy with how things went. At least it's not as bad as we figured. Just like some of the comments over the offseason saying if we basically throw these hybrid engines out of St. Pete, you only see 4 drivers finish the race, and we saw a whole bunch of drivers finish this race nearly. And I think IndyCar has to feel very happy with how all of this has gone. And I think as the races go on and these teams get more data with this hybrid engine, when the drivers get more practice using the hybrid power, I really think that we're going to see an improvement in the on-track product. This was just race 1, so I definitely wouldn't be worried. I know we didn't really see much passing today, but that battle we saw for the win between O'Ward and Palou, it was fantastic. And I think at the end of the day, that's what a lot of people are going to take for this. And Ben, you also mentioned two drivers. I also wanted to highlight Santino Ferrucci in a race. They only had that one caution at the very beginning for Scott Dixon, for him to go from outside the top 20 to a top 10 finish. I think that's very impressive run for the AJ Foyt racing driver. He's honestly outperforming his equipment right now, but you also have to remember they have that alliance with Team Penske, so Ferrucci is definitely doing a great job making the most of the opportunity, having access, to the Penske equipment and all of that. And then Toby Sowery, I know he's a familiar name for all you Indy Next fans out there, and Sowery, he's been in and out of sports car racing since he ran out of funding with Indy Next, and for him to come in like this and make an IndyCar debut in the middle of the season, which is very hard to do in any racing series, and to finish where he finished inside the top 15, that's a spectacular drive from Sowery. And it would not surprise me if he's able to bring more funding to Delcoin Racing. If he sees more races, he proves this weekend that he deserves another opportunity to race an IndyCar.
Overall, I would say this was a big success, the hybrid era of racing, because one of the big things, I was concerned that we would see issues with the hybrid power unit and becoming a storyline of the race. That was not a case. The strategy on using it, I felt, okay, that's part of it, but we didn't have issue after issue where then the storyline became the power units, the hybrid engines are impacting the quality of the racing. We still had a good quality race, a race that went caution-free. As you mentioned, Kobe, some drivers that climbed up from deep in the field towards the front. Good racing overall. I think this is a huge success for IndyCar, considering the year they've been having, where they've not exactly had some of the greatest publicities and at times had us shaking their heads. This has to feel good. Strong start. People are talking about the races, the finish, O'Ward, Palou. They're not talking about issues. They're not talking about the power units in a negative light. I think that's a huge success for IndyCar.
Well, we saw a race where strategy came into play. Executing a perfect pit stop was the difference between winning and second place for Palou. 3 out of the last 4 races have had 5 or more cautions. So one exception was Road America with 3 cautions. So a bit of a break from that pattern here today. Kobe, was it a breath of fresh air to have a race where we saw strategies play out naturally and we didn't have to have those multiple cautions and restarts?
Yeah, I definitely think today's race was refreshing, and it's really crazy to think that the only caution was at the very beginning. We're coming to agreement. Scott Dixon's car stalled there, and I got to give a hand to all the drivers. I know it's warm this time of year, and for those drivers, the battle, the heat. I know Jack Harvey, he posted on social media after the race that he was battling like some neck and back spasm. Hope he gets well. I know it was a very difficult day for him in the car, and looking where he finished. The second to last was a very rough day for that number 18 Delcoin Racing team. But yeah, looking at the last handful of races, it's been really crazy, with all the caution, especially that race at Detroit. You remember that was more like a demolition derby with all of the cautions, all the starts, crash, restart. It was just rinse and repeat. And I think the drivers handled themselves very well today. Saw a lot of hard, clean racing, and then being able to follow all the strategies and all of that. It was a great race to follow.
Yeah, it was a great race, and especially in this era where we have, a lot of cautions, drivers being more aggressive. I felt the race went really well with the respect level. I know at the very last lap or 2 laps ago, Grosjean went spinning, but he kept it off the wall, kept running. So the race kept going. And overall, this is why I think makes IndyCar racing great, because it is just pure racing, just trying to go out there as fast as you can, making the strategy work. we don't have breaks in the racing action. We have it where it's just you go out there, you race, and if you could pull off a pass like Pato O'Ward did through using the pit stops, you could get around what many people thought was the fastest car with Palou and prove you got something faster. And still, he had to fight off Palou with all that lap traffic ahead of him. This is a great breath of fresh air for IndyCar because Detroit, that was a race where I was just thinking, I can't wait for this race to be done. The other races, it just seemed, oh man, are we going to get some good racing? And we did that today with IndyCar. So big kudos to all the drivers and everyone that raced really smart races today at Mid-Ohio.
And Joe, before we move on, I just wanted to add one more point about the new hybrid engine, which I think could potentially cut down on the number of cautions that we see on the track at these road and street course tracks. And before a driver spin go off course,
yep.
and you stall, you need to have the safety workers to come out there and restart you. You saw Grosjean went off; he was able to use the hybrid system to restart the car. Otherwise, the race would have ended under caution, and been able to cycle that through and get it restarted. That's a great thing. And I believe during either practice or qualifying session during the weekend, I believe it was Nolan Siegel who went off track, and he was like one of the first, or was this morning in warm up? I can't remember what session it was in, but I think it was him who went off course, and then he was able to restart the car and get it going again. I think that's a great feature to have, so we're not adding all these unnecessary cautions. That it can be in the driver's hand. You give them enough time, they can get the car restarted, so we don't have to throw a caution for it to get safety worker to restart them. So I think that's going to be a benefit for IndyCar moving forward.
Absolutely. We'll leave it there. We've got some ovals to look forward to coming up in the IndyCar schedule. So the championship fight, certainly not over in that regard, but lots to look forward to over in the IndyCar series. Kobe, let's transition over now to another form of open wheel racing, Formula One, a thrilling British Grand Prix today.
Yeah, there was a lot to look forward to in this year's British Grand Prix, and I actually set my alarm clock early to wake up and watch this race, which is something I normally do. Everyone knows that I'm a night owl. I'm not a early riser, so I thought it was well worth getting up to watch this race live instead of watching highlights. So the British Grand Prix saw several lead changes occurring on track and in the pits. Today's race at Silverstone was a true test of skill and adaptability, with the weather changing from rain to sun and back again. And in a moment of national pride, one of the British drivers emerged victorious this year. Lewis Hamilton finally ended his winless streak, winning for the first time since the 2021 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Hamilton got around Mercedes teammate George Russell when the rain initially showed up. Lando Norris got around Hamilton, but Lewis got around him again with pit strategy after everyone started switching back to slicks. Hamilton, his race engineer Bono, stood on the podium's top step, his 9th win at his home Grand Prix. So, Joe, I'm going to start off with you. Lewis is finally back in victory lane. How great is it for the sport to see such an iconic driver back to his winning ways? I mean, the scenes from Silverstone, it was just absolutely incredible. It was almost like a folk store or something like that.
Yeah, the home country hero, getting the win, a big cheer. But honestly, I would feel, regardless of where he won, if he had broken that streak at any track, I think he would still be such a popular win, because I feel a lot of drivers, regardless of this playing Formula One, IndyCar, when you get to a point where, okay, you're getting up there in your career, you're not getting the wins like you used to, but people remember when you were so dominant, even at times when we were getting booed for winning too often. When you break a winless spell like that, that is just something that a lot of fans gravitate as. You still got it. Still remembering the good times you had. Congratulations. And I think that was a big moment. And for Formula One, especially after last year, all the talk about this is going to be Max Verstappen's year. Max Verstappen's going to dominate. Max Verstappen still is the heavy favorite. It is proven to F1, like, look, Lewis Hamilton, one of the best all time, and he just won at Silverstone. You want to tune into the next race, see what he could do. Mercedes team, they seem to be back on form. That's huge to say, hey, if you're a Mercedes fan, don't check out because it's going to be just a Max Verstappen show. Tune in because we could see them at Hungary next weekend get a win. That's a track Lewis Hamilton likes. The Mercedes team has had success there. This is huge for Formula One to just bring in new life to their season, which compared to last year is not as dominant, but I still think a lot of people are just anticipating the Red Bull dominance will kick up again and he's just going to take the championship.
Yeah, I still think Max is the favorite for the championship for sure, but great to see Lewis back on the top step of the podium. And I don't know, symbolically, it almost feels like his last win with Mercedes. I'm glad that he has at least gotten this one, and what a place to get it. His home race where he's had so much success, his 9th victory at this track, a new Formula One record for him, as if he didn't have enough of those already. I guess you could say he broke the all-time wins record again today, broke his own record, extended his own record with that one as well. And it reminds me, again, a lot of Kimi Räikkönen winning at Coda in 2018, knowing that he was not leaving the sport, but going on to a team in the Alfa Romeo Sauber team that, we could expect probably wasn't going to be contending for race wins on a weekly basis. So for Kimi to get that last win with Ferrari was a really special feeling, a very popular win. I'm sure this one will be as well. Now, with the pace that Mercedes has shown, I certainly wouldn't put it past Lewis Hamilton or George Russell for that matter. You feel bad for him, unfortunately, having to retire the car after he took pole position. But Mercedes certainly look like they have that race-winning pace again. So we'll see if they can break out a couple more race wins before the calendar rolls over and Lewis goes on to Ferrari, where, again, different situation than Kimi Räikkönen all those years ago. I would not put winning a race or two at Ferrari past Lewis Hamilton by any means either. We'll see how competitive Ferrari seem to be. Hopefully they can get their strategy back in order. I'm sure Charles Leclerc is praying for that today as well. But my goodness, great. Kobe, like you mentioned, just the scenes at Silverstone, absolutely incredible. And like I said, what is this, 104 wins, I think, now for Lewis Hamilton? This may be the most popular one out of all of them, because like you were mentioning, Joe, I think you're seeing it with Verstappen now. There may be people who, maybe they don't even hate Max Verstappen. They just wish we could get a little bit more parity, wish it could be a little bit more competitive. And so, and we saw it today. I think a lot of fans were saying, Max Verstappen's coming. Is it going to be all of this just for another Max win? And what a buzzkill that's going to be. And it's not anything Max has done. Of course, he's going to try to win every race he starts. But after a race like that, for it to just end up with a result that we've gotten so many times over the last 3 years, I do think would have been a bit of a buzzkill for a lot of people. So to have such a popular winner in Lewis Hamilton at his home race, breaking a long winless streak, absolutely incredible. Great to see, and great for the entire sport of Formula One racing.
Yeah, totally agree with both of you. And I've never seen Lewis Hamilton this emotional in a long time, or even ever. You could tell how much this meant to him. Hugging his family, his race engineer Bono, Toto's, even George Russell congratulating him. It was just a really special day today in Silverstone for Lewis Hamilton to win in his home race. And Ben, I agree with the point you made about this potentially being Lewis's last win as a Mercedes driver, given how Mercedes have improved this season. We're not surprised to see Lewis win again this year, but it would really seem very poetic if this is the final one as a Mercedes driver to go out as a winner at your home Grand Prix. And I don't think it gets any better than that. And I think one of the reasons why, Lewis Hamilton got so emotional today, it's not just the fact that it's just his final year at Mercedes before he goes to Ferrari next year. We know it's been a struggle for Lewis Hamilton these last few years. Mercedes car not that great, and been like 2.5 years since he's last won. So when that amount of time goes by, you have to ask yourself and wonder, am I ever going to win again? I'm sure that has crossed Lewis's mind, because Lewis Hamilton, he's been at the top of his game for so long, and he's been in contention to win races, have cars that can take the fight for the win, and world championships and constructor championships. And I think when you go so long without winning, you always have to keep asking yourself, do I still have it? Am I still that guy who can get the job done week in and week out? I'm sure a lot of people have wondered, with George Russell, seemingly adapting better to this Mercedes than Lewis Hamilton in the last few years. I'm sure some people have wondered, has Lewis Hamilton entered the phase of his career where he's past his prime and doesn't really have what it takes anymore? I think Lewis showed today that he still has a lot left in the tank, and I'm sure he's going to continue to give it his all throughout the rest of the 2024 season, so him and Mercedes can truly end on a high note. But I think today was the highest note that he's been on in a very long time. And as Mercedes looks to be back in winning form, McLaren could have potentially had a 1-2 finish today. Oscar Piastri was left out an extra lap to avoid a double stack when Norris and others pitted. Mercedes successfully pulled off a double stack, and Russell only ended up losing a few seconds. Then Hamilton did the undercut to get around Norris, with Lando falling in third as Max Verstappen got around him. Ben, was McLaren playing too conservatively with its strategy today, and should they get more aggressive in future races?
Yeah, I think easily either Norris or Piastri could have won today if McLaren had done a little bit different strategy than they did. So absolutely, they're too conservative now. In complete fairness, they're not used to being in this position. It's been a very long time. You really have to go back to when Lewis Hamilton was driving for them, that we've talked about McLaren on a weekly basis like this being contenders for race wins in this way, shape, and form here. Of course, Lando got a win earlier this year at Miami. I wouldn't put it past Oscar Piastri to get his maiden win later this year as well. But, again, I mean, it's got to be frustrating if you're a McLaren fan knowing that you had the opportunity today, as Lando has had multiple opportunities this year. He probably could have 3, maybe 4 race wins at this point of the season, and maybe that championship fight would be a little bit closer than it is. 84 points, halfway through a year. Is it insurmountable? No, but it's a 3-race advantage, essentially, maybe a little bit more if you don't take sprint racing into account, at least, for Max Verstappen there. So he is far and away the clear favorite still. And if McLaren continue to not take advantage of opportunities like they had today, then absolutely Verstappen is just going to continue, while maybe not in dominant form, winning every single race and only dropping 45 points or whatever it was throughout the entire season. He is going to be the clear championship winner, and McLaren's going to certainly regret not being able to take advantage of the positions that they put themselves in and closing the deal and winning more of these races.
You bring up a good point about McLaren not being in the situation in quite some time. It really sort of surprised me because I know for Mercedes, they've been struggling for a while. They got that win, but it just seemed like the Mercedes of old when they did the double stack with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. It's like they've done this time and time again, even though it's been quite some time since we've seen that. I don't know why McLaren felt like, oh, let's just keep Oscar out of extra lap because that just impacted his race. And then when Lewis made the next pit stop, we knew the track conditions were changing. They could have easily made the pit stop, and if Lewis had stayed out, upper hand still on Lando Norris. So overall, I think McLaren, they do have to be a bit more aggressive. And let's be honest, especially since we anticipate this is going to be Max Verstappen winning the championship, be more aggressive. Okay, Ferrari, they're not exactly on top of their game. Mercedes, this was a good race weekend. Are they really that capable of coming back? They're quite behind in the constructor standing. Take more of the risk, especially if you're going to try to wrestle this championship away from Max Verstappen, and you're going to have to wrestle it away. You're going to have to be more aggressive. And then at least next year what worked, what didn't work, and then you could really, from race one, start contending for the championship with the drivers and the constructors.
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually really surprised how quickly the cars that entered the pits and, switched to those tires end up catching Piastri. It would just show you, how bad of a decision it was. Piastri was just really struggling on those tires. Honestly, like I mentioned, Mercedes was able to pull off a successful double stack. George Russell only had to wait for a little bit for Lewis Hamilton for them to complete that pit stop before it was time for his pit stop. So honestly, I think it would have been much better for Piastri to just take a few seconds off, just like George Russell did, and because we saw what happened at the end. Leaving him out, they end up absolutely killing his race. And if I was Piastri, I'd be very angry with the race engineers for making that call. That was definitely a very bad strategy call, and I felt like McLaren should have definitely played that strategy more aggressively than they did, because I think it ended up costing them big time in this race. And looking at Max Verstappen again, he ended up growing his lead in the driver's standings. Red Bull is still ahead in the constructors comfortably, despite Sergio Perez not scoring points once again. And this comes as rumors that Liam Lawson will reportedly test the 2024 Red Bull F1 car in the coming days. Ferrari and Mercedes have had both drivers win this year. McLaren only won with Lando Norris. Those teams have shown that they can beat Red Bull on a perfect day. Joe, which team is looking in the best shape entering the Hungarian Grand Prix?
Not counting Red Bull, I'm looking at Mercedes. They've had success at this track. This is a track Lewis Hamilton likes. They, I think, have the advantage because with the Hungarian Grand Prix, qualifying is going to be where you're really going to have to be good. Passing is going to be very hard. If they could have a strong qualifying effort, I think they could easily be up there contending for the win. They could hold on Max Verstappen. I'm looking at Mercedes as the potential favorite for the upcoming race weekend. They're in the best shape, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's tempting to say Red Bull because I still think Max Verstappen is the best driver in the best car, but there's the issue of that second seat. And again, this is why the 2-year contract extension that they just gave Checo was so mind-boggling because, again, it's not anything personal. He hasn't done anything or shown anything on track to earn it. And if anything, now you're having these rumors start to swirl again that maybe they're going to put Ricardo back in the car, which I wouldn't understand because I feel like he has underperformed a little bit since his comeback with the old AlphaTauri, now RB team. But Liam Lawson, again, I think is on the short list for that seat. Some people are probably going to argue on Yuki Tsunoda's behalf. I mean, they have other options at Red Bull for that second car, and Sergio Perez just continues to underperform in it. So I don't know. I think all the momentum's with Mercedes right now. Their 2 drivers have won the last couple of races here. We'll see. I don't know if that track is going to suit that their style a little bit in terms of the car to be able to go out and perform like this again. But we'll see. They certainly have all the momentum with them right now for sure.
Yeah, back-to-back victories for Mercedes kind of seem like old times again, doesn't it? Right before Red Bull started this run with Max Verstappen, but yeah, not a good weekend for Sergio Perez once again. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do for Liam Lawson since Liam Lawson has his schedule, for so late in the week. It would be quite a surprise if they decided to make a driver change. Ahead of the Hungarian Grand Prix. But I know I said on our private chat, I said with the way Checo is running this year, I would not be surprised if Red Bulls are, going to be talking to lawyers and to get out of that silly contract extension that they hand out, and he won't be the driver at the start of the 2025 season. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say if he keeps this up, he won't even finish at the 2024 season. And I would not put that past Red Bull. We've seen time and time again in the past how ruthless that they are with their drivers, and the honest truth is that Checo is just not delivering. He should be finishing a lot higher in that second Red Bull car, and he's really letting the team down in the constructors. Max is basically fighting with one hand behind his back because his teammate is not really giving him much help these days given everything that's going on. And of course, moving on, Lewis Hamilton is going to be going to Ferrari, and the rumors are that Andrea Kimi Antonelli is going to be replacing him next season at Mercedes. Ben, I know you've been following Formula 2, and we'll recap the sprint and the feature races tomorrow on Grid Encore, as Antonelli just won for the very first time in Formula 2, taking the sprint race win at Silverstone. Starting with you, Ben, what are your thoughts on Antonelli finally getting that maiden F2 win? I know you said you wanted to see him at least get a podium and get a win before we started talking about him going to Formula 1, and it has finally happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sprint win. I still would like to see a feature win out of him as well, and maybe he'll get that later this season. But, good for him, credit where it's due. A good weekend for him in the sprint, at least. I know the feature obviously didn't go how he would have wanted, but yeah, I still, it doesn't change my mind too much. It's not like he's the runaway championship favorite or anything, and I feel like it would be a very high risk, potentially low reward situation to rush him up to Formula One, kind of give him that Max Verstappen treatment and put him in a Mercedes that quickly. And even Max, people might forget this, Max spent 1 year and 4 races at Toro Rosso before he got promoted to the Red Bull seat. So, it'd be one thing to slide him into the Williams next year, or the Aston Martin, I suppose. I still think Lance Stroll has that seat on lock until he decides otherwise, but that's a topic for another day, I suppose. But I think putting him straight into the Mercedes this early, would be, like I said, a very low reward, high risk situation, and you long-term risk, wasting the potential that this kid may have. But good for him to win a sprint race this weekend and certainly make up some ground in terms of that momentum, and we'll see if he can capitalize on it. And if he can, maybe that Williams seat does open up, and it's a good opportunity for him to get his feet wet in Formula One before replacing arguably the greatest driver of all time, who picked up once again another win today.
You bring up a lot of good points, Ben. The one thing I keep thinking too, the immense amount of pressure he's going to be having next year, considering his age, the exceptions made to the super license. He got that sprint race win. Well, that's great and dandy. The feature race didn't go his way. Really curious to see how he does, because at the end of the day, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure of, do you really belong in this seat? You're replacing Lewis Hamilton. I think a lot of folks will be critical if he goes out there in that Mercedes and the first race has a wreck where people will be saying Lewis would have never done that. A rookie may have not done that. You're being rushed. I think that's a big risk that Mercedes are going to have to defend him, try to keep his head game in the right spot, because I think there's just so much pressure that'll be on him that a lot of people, and possibly he's not aware of, because like you said, it's a big risk, little reward. If it works out great, well, that's good, but it just really feels rushed to me. And just this one weekend, I still don't think makes it where it demonstrates he's ready to replace such big shoes in Mercedes.
Yeah, and people really treat Kimi Antonelli as the next coming of Ayrton Senna because of the immense talent that he's shown in the junior categories. They really believe that he's going to be one of the next legends of the sport that we're going to be talking about years down the road, like in the same conversation as, let's say, a Lewis Hamilton, a Sebastian Vettel, or even Senna himself, or a Michael Schumacher. And I think this kid has a lot of pressure on his shoulders right now, and I hope that Mercedes is going to be able to help him manage it, because once he goes into Formula One, it's a whole different ball game. Every move he makes is going to be heavily scrutinized, and especially if Mercedes builds a great car for the 2025 season, a car that's capable of doing what it did today the last couple of races, to go out there and get the win. And if George Russell is out there doing well in that car, and Antonelli is struggling very badly, so basically if George Russell is doing what Max Verstappen usually does, go out there and win, and Antonelli is basically doing what Sergio Perez usually does, which is underachieve, then that's going to be a lot of pressure on him. And we've seen time and time again across motorsport, when you see great talents come up through the ranks, if you rush them up too quickly, they could end up failing. I hope that doesn't happen for Antonelli. I think it would be smarter if he does go to F1 next year, that would be best for him to do a season in the Williams seat, potentially sign someone maybe like 1 or 2 years to occupy that Mercedes seat, and then once that time has passed, then move Antonelli up to the Mercedes senior team. I think that would be a reasonable development plan for him, so he's not under a lot of pressure. And I know Alex Albon has talked about in the past where he'd be okay with Williams sacrificing 2025 so to come out hitting on all cylinders in 2026. So if Williams is not going to have the best car next year, I think that would be a great opportunity for Antonelli to learn, the ropes and how to get it done in F1 in a car where he's not going to face a lot of pressure to perform and get the job done, versus going to Mercedes where you're in a good car. You're gonna be expected to finish in the points and to be matching George Russell week in and week out, and I think that could end up backfiring on Mercedes if it comes down to that. But I would not oppose him being in Formula 2 for another year. I think that would be very good for his development, since obviously it doesn't look like he's going to be in the championship fight this year. I think another season of F2 would be best for him, but if he goes to F1, please put him at Williams and don't put him at the Mercedes team, because I feel like you're opening the door for a lot of risk there. And if we don't have anything else to add about that, Ben, I'll throw it over to you for a grid ranking this week.
Sounds good. And a brief updated MotoGP and Supercars as we take a look at week 14 of the grid ranking, which sees no change in the top spot. It is still Pecco Bagnaia, who extends his lead a little bit after he swept the weekend sprint and Grand Prix of Germany. But Jorge Martin was leading with 2 laps to go and then crashed out, giving Pecco the win there. So Pecco's got 6 wins across 9 races, only 1 finish outside the top 10. And as you can see on the left side of your screen is leading the rider standings, rather. So, Joe, can he start pulling away from Jorge Martin and the rest of the field? Marc Marquez, Nia Bastianini, Maverick Vinales on Beck?
I think so. The big thing that keeps everything so close is the sprint races. Of course, the sprint races, that's where Pecco is not exactly the greatest, and Jorge Martin's strength has been. If Pecco Bagnaia could keep being good, consistent in the sprint races, he could then start pulling away, but I think that's where he needs to improve. It's not just a matter of, okay, keep doing what you're doing, because up until this weekend, it's not exactly been that great. I mean, he wasn't leading the points for a while because of the lousy sprint races, the inconsistency. But now Martin is showing that. I think Martin, that was just, everyone's calling it a blunder. I have to agree with it too. He had that race won essentially 2 laps ago, leading it, goes down. Pecco Bagnaia, another win, sweeps the weekend. Pecco Bagnaia, if he continues improving his sprint race efforts, even if he's just finishing second place in every sprint race, he could then start pulling away. But I don't think it's as easy as he just needs to outperform Martin.
And let's flip over to Supercars now. Will Brown returns to second place, I believe, referring to the grid ranking there. But he was rather lucky this weekend. There you go. There it is, second place, 1749 for Will Brown. Third place, race 1 at Townsville, up at Townsville 500, and last in race 2. But with Martin crashing out, he took second. Had Verstappen won the Grand Prix today, he would be up in second place in the grid ranking. So very tight battle for that second spot there as well. Kobe, this is only the second time Will Brown has not finished on the podium in 15 races this season. Was this just an off weekend for him in Triple Eight, or has the field caught up to them?
Yeah, it was a very strange weekend for Triple Eight because at least one of their cars are usually in contention in these supercar races on any given weekend. But for the first time in a long time, we never really saw Will Brown or Brock Feeney in contention. I know in race 1, Will Brown had that late race charge to finish on the podium there. Yeah, so he was able to salvage a really good point stay there, and ended up getting turned into the wall and suffering damage in the second race. And then Brock Feeney, he just didn't have the pace at all in either race. It was very surprising to see Triple Eight down. And but I'm just gonna label this as an off weekend. And for Will Brown, Brock Feeney, and the whole Triple Eight operation, I'm sure they'll go back to the drawing board and they'll be able to fire off at the next round back in contention. But I think one of the biggest stories from this is you have to look at Ford. I remember when this new Gen 3 Supercars era started, it was nothing but the Chevrolets up front. All the Ford drivers, Ford teams, they were complaining about being down on power, not being able to take the fight to Chevrolet. But it seemed like the tables had turned. It seemed like now the Fords have the advantage and the Chevys are the ones who are struggling to keep up. So when you're doing your pick a winner segment, always picking the Chevrolet power drivers, I think now you might want to shift and look at those Ford drivers like a Cam Waters or Chaz Mostert or a Matt Payne, who ended up taking the race 2 win on the streets of Townsville. Yeah, I really think that the second half of the Supercar season is going to be super interesting championship-wise, because it seemed like, Will Brown, Brock Feeney were in prime position here, but Cam Waters, Chaz Mostert, those guys, they're really coming on strong. And if Brown and Feeney end up having some issues down the stretch, I really think we could see some of those other drivers continue to close the gap, although it's certainly going to be a tall order.
All right, and I believe we also have the full grid ranking, which will show, there we go, Kyle Larson dropping down to 19th after his crash at Chicago. William Byron, his teammate, right there as well in 20th. So these are the full standings, which will also be posted online at Grid Network TV across all our social media platforms. And also don't forget, Matthew Bro and Jackson Lambros will have articles posted on the Grid Network TV website recapping the NASCAR and INDYCAR races respectively. So with that, Kobe, I'll hand it over to you to kick off our One Shining Moment segment.
Yeah, it's time for a great One Shining Moment. If you're watching live or not, leave a comment down in the chat below and let us know what moment stood out to you most from this racing weekend, from any other races in the grid ranking. And Ben, I'll start off with you. What's your good One Shining Moment from this weekend?
Well, I kind of feel like there are really 3 obvious ones, one in each series. So I'll take the NASCAR one here, and I'll see maybe. I hope I'm not stealing it from either you, Joe or Kobe, but I think there's plenty to choose from on a weekend like this. One from each series in my mind stands out in particular. But in NASCAR, I have to give it to Joey Hand, who I think had things gone slightly differently, had we had more chaos on the restarts, had NASCAR maybe held firm and gone with double file restarts, maybe we could have seen from second year in a row an extra entry, an open car driver from a different discipline coming in here and winning the Chicago street race. So Joey Hand certainly put on one heck of a show today and gave Alex Bowman a run for his money there at the end. Even after getting past, he did not let him drive away there until the very end when his tires began to fall off a little bit more. But great strategy on the part of the entire Stage 60 team over at RFK Racing. 4th place finish today for Joey Hand. That is my one shining moment, as well as Stage 2 victory for good measure as well. So congratulations to that entire team there.
My shining moment, I think I'm taking the obvious one from Formula One. Lewis Hamilton getting that win. So good to see him back on the top side of the podium. He has done so much for the sport of Formula One, on the track, off the track. Seeing him go winless the last 2 years, I think a lot of folks were wondering, does he still have it? Everyone's excited about him going to Ferrari next year, and this win, I think, silenced any doubters. If he has a good car, he can still go out there get the win. Lewis Hamilton in front of his home country. Very popular win, not just for race fans of Formula One, but I think for the sport of Formula One in general. This is going to be headlines around the world. It's helpful for Formula One. That's my shining moment.
And my one shining moment is race 1 of the Townsville 500. I thought Cam Waters and Chaz Mostert put on an absolute clinic. And I even said on next side, this is an all-time classic Supercars race. It reminds me of that race last year at Perth with Shane Van Gisbergen and Brody Kostecki with that amazing battle. It wasn't as rough as those two, but I thought Waters and Mostert put on a very great show. And then at the end of that race, it was absolutely pouring in just one corner of the racetrack. And we thought that the teams were going to have to switch over to the rain tires, but instead they stayed out on slicks, and those drivers, they braved it through those conditions. I have to give a hand to the entire Supercars field in race 1. That was during that one corner, it was extremely slick through there, but they left it on slicks and they were able to manage it. I just thought that race was just so incredible. It's definitely one of those races that I'm going to go back and watch in the future. Kudos to Waters and Mostert for putting on an absolute great show. There was just a phenomenal race all throughout the field. It was unfortunate that Sunday's race was just a little bit more tamer than that, but I definitely thought we got quite the banger on Saturday.
Yeah, that was a very exciting first race in Townsville. Great action. And of course, we got more action to recap tomorrow. Grid Encore. Ben will be on the air with Brandon and Mara for Formula 2, Formula 3 recap. So be sure to hit the subscribe button. Invest in the Grid Network by hitting the subscribe button and the bell icon. You don't miss any of our programs. And of course, share with your family and friends that love motorsports. That will help us with the algorithm. And of course, Grid Network TV articles are going to be worked on tonight and up for INDYCAR and the NASCAR races. And invest in the Grid Network through Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, or each and every month through Patreon. One of the big things calling the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew have been investing in us for quite some time. We appreciate them. You invest in us, you get some Grid Network stickers sent out to you. And if you do a super chat of $10 or more, or Buy Me a Coffee, Grid Network stickers mailed out to you. For everyone here on the Grid Network, Kobe Lambeth, Ben Schneider, I'm Joe Sandiego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time, and enjoy all the action right here on the Grid Network. Take care, everyone.